Well, hello. I should now be live from Edgestone Studios. Hello, everyone. I didn't turn my lights on. Let me get those going first. Welcome to my first ever YouTube live stream. What you're listening to in the background there is the song Exhale from our band Waveform Mountain. That's, I think, the 7th song on the album. It's a nice 10-minute long, creepy, eerie, flowing epic that morphs and twists, and I just love it. Anyways, let's fade that out. Should be fading out from your mix now. Okay, so the purpose of my live stream today is to talk about the Personus Studiolive Series 3 Mixer series. I particularly have the Studiolive 32S. And really what I want to do is allow people to jump on, get an overview of the mixer and ask some questions, and hopefully I can answer them. I've been using the Studiolive in my studio for, well, since the beginning of 2022. So all of 2022, 2023, and now 3/4, or I guess we're halfway through 2024. And really, if you are watching this, there's a good chance you've been following my channel and you watched my video on why I switched to a Personus Studiolive Mixer. I called it "Do Studiolive Mixers Rival Apollo Universal Audio Apollo Interfaces?" And that was just my clickbaity title, because the real issue, or the real story, was I had Universal Audio. I was all set up with 32 channels of Universal Audio bass stuff, including my 500 series preamps, and I decided to switch to a Studiolive Mixer, and I've been using it in the studio ever since, and I have no issues with the quality of the sound I get from it. If you get a chance to listen to our album, I'll put a link in the chat here. It's as good as any interface you're going to get for creating music nowadays. And whether people want to be super opinionated about it or not, my opinion is kind of more general, which is, yes, there are better quality of everything out there, but in terms of being able to make quality music these days, you don't need expensive gear. You just need quality gear that works. And almost every audio interface made these days has high quality converters compared to 10 years ago. When I started in on mixing and recording in the 2000s, it was 2007 that I bought my first DAW. I was using Cakewalk at that point in time. I went through a variety of different interfaces. I was using Motu. I was using Mackie Mixer at one point in time. And I was on Windows, and it was not always great. But things have improved so much that we're at the point now where everything else is moot. The idea of having higher quality preamps really comes down to, do you want to? Do you want to spend the money? Do you like the gear? How do you want to work with it? So what I thought I'd do, and this is my first live stream, so I'm going to try and keep an eye on the chat. I've got that up on my upper monitor. That's why I keep looking up. And I can see there's at least a couple current viewers. Please, if you're watching, let me know where you're from. It's be interesting to see where people are watching from. I'm on Vancouver Island in Canada, and I'm in the Cowichan Valley, and you can find that all out on my channel probably if you watch it, or just going to my website. But here, let me give you the link to our album here. So that link will take you to a landing page that will take you to whether you want to go to Spotify or Tidal or which Apple Music, and also you can find our website from there. And it's a 12-song, we call it alt pop. It's synth-based music with guitar and real bass and ethereal vocals. My daughter's the vocalist. I'm the main composer. My son joins in on some of the guitar and backing vocals, and it's the first full thing I produced, and it was fully produced on the Studiolive. So that would be something to listen to. Now, this is my first full album, so you're also got to take that in mind. It's my first full production. I've been fiddling with audio for a long time, but Obviously, your ears get better the more you do, and the more you mix, and keep that in mind when you're listening to it. Okay, so here we are at the Studiolive, and really, I tried to set up the camera so you'd have a clear view of everything. I don't have a zoom in mode to get detailed, so hopefully you can make out the text, and if you go full screen you should be able to. But basically I just thought I'd go through the overview of the mixer first and what you get, and then look at some of the special things to set up when you're using it in a studio environment as opposed to live, because these mixers are probably sold 90% for live mixing, and 10% of the people buy them for their studios. But it's when you look at the cost of universal audio interface, and you want 8 channels of preamps, and maybe you want a separate one with the you want the desktop unit with the volume knob, and you add that all up, it's going to cost you more than something that gives you, or at least as much as, but in my case it was more than something that gives you 32 full channels of input. So I was in user mode there for a sec, but the default mode, and I've kind of reset some of my mixer for this presentation. The default mode is you have 32 channels, and on the back of the unit you have 32 XLR inputs, so you can plug 32 mics in, which seems overkill for a small studio, but I have a lot of synthesizers, and I wanted to make sure that all my synths were always plugged in, even when I wanted to go and use things in the tracking room. And just to give you a sense here, let me switch over to the full view here. I mean, this is my tracking room. I've got a full drum kit. There's technically 16 mic inputs in there, but I've hooked it up in such a way that 2 of them are used to cross over into my entryway, and 2 of them are used for feeding the main speakers in there, and then the rest are used for production. So I have 12 mic inputs default. I can rearrange that if I need to. And the inputs on the back, I don't have a back screenshot, but the inputs on the back, there's 16 of them are XLR only, and that's 1 to 16. And then from 17 on, they're combo jacks, which are both XLR and 1/4 inch. So you can plug line inputs in directly, such as keyboards. And if I go back to the switcher here, no, you probably can't see it, but if you go to my room view, I've got my composing station beside me, and that's plugged into different inputs on the interface here so that I can work directly. They're not labeled right now because I'm on a different scene at the moment. But so let's go back to the switcher inset here. Okay, so basically it's a digital mixer, so it works like an analog mixer where every single channel is an individual input, but because it's digital, the routing can be different than what you see. So by default, when you start up, you've got 32 channels. Each of these channels is one of the mic inputs on the back, or line inputs if you choose to on 17 and up. And you can select those inputs. You could solo those inputs. Whoops, I don't want to solo that here. And you could mute those inputs, and once you select them, you have access to all the controls related to that particular channel up in what they call the fat channel interface. So instead of putting individual EQs and individual compressors controls and individual gain controls on every channel, they're shared in the center on what's called the fat channel. And the fat channel is basically their digital software for EQ and compression and gating and high pass filtering and the gain. So for example, if I choose channel 1, if you can see here, you might not be able to see it, but on the screen it says the gain is at 0, and as I turn this knob, the gain goes up, and I can change the preamp gain. But you'll see it also changing on the touch screen, and that's probably a little bit easier to see. This central knob for the touch screen, I'm selected on preamp there, does the exact same thing. So the 2 controls doing the same thing, but on the touch screen I could decide that, oh, I want to adjust something else, and use that knob to adjust that particular control rather than using the dedicated knobs up here. So they end up with dual functionality. So every single channel has input control. So that's your gain, which I'm going to put back to 0 for now. They each have a gate built in, so you could cut out noise. Hey, Hip Metalworks, welcome to my stream. And built-in compressor, and there's a variety of software compressors you can go through. Built-in EQ, variety of EQs. There are auxiliary sends, which we'll get to in a bit, which you can get to here. And then there are your various options for how you're going to use that channel. The default is to be on analog, and although they're all lit up, this one should be lit up a little bit more because I'm currently on analog. If I choose network, you can see it's gone a brighter green. It's sort of hard to see that the blue is lit up. It looks about the same color as the other ones, but default is analog. If you go network, you can connect to an external rack or full board unit that has AVB networking, and any of those channels can come from that remote device. If you go USB, you can feed the input from the USB connected to your computer, so you could come back from your digital audio workstation into your board. And if you go SD card, you can have recorded information onto an SD card and be playing that back on those tracks. So you could have canned music, you could have a previous band, what do you call it? Not rehearsal, but when they come to do a sound check. When you do a sound check, you could record that sound check to an SD card, come to a new venue, and even without the band there, you could use the SD card playing back to do your sound check. Now, obviously not used for use in the studio. We got Ian Anderson here. Hey, Ian, how you doing? Yes, Ian has been to the studio, and he's a drummer, and he's fantastic, and I hope to get him back up here. Maybe you can give me some lessons. And we got Ragged Wreck here, who will never sell their 32 and stage boxes. So that's great. So feel free, those of you who have the mixer, feel free to ask any questions as we go along. I'll keep sort of occasionally looking up at the live stream. I was kind of planning about an hour. I tend to ramble. I could easily talk for an hour and a half, 2 hours, but I'm thinking around an hour to cover most things. But so you have a digital mixer, separate channels, control section for each of those channels. Then you also have auxiliaries. So you'll notice that I've got 15 and 16 lit up here. And that's because for this setup, for my stream, my desk mic is way over here on number 32. And that's the mic I'm speaking into right now. And that is going out through 15 and 16 to the live stream for YouTube. And I've done that so that I can keep my room mixes, my main mix, completely separate. So down the side here, these different banks, the main mix is your mix in the room. That's what you're going to hear out of your speakers, your monitors out. That's typically what you'll hear out of your speakers, your monitor outs, but that's definitely what you hear out of the mains you connect. And the mains is often in a studio environment. If you have a tracking room, your mains might be a set of speakers in the tracking room to play back music for the musicians on speakers rather than headphones. And then you have auxiliary mixes, 16 of them. They're mono unless you link them. And when you link them, they can become stereo. And obviously, if you link them all, you'd only have 8. And then you have 4 different digital effects that are basically delay and reverb. I believe there might be a chorus as well. I almost never use them other than the reverb and the delay for tracking vocals, because often vocalists want a bit of reverb or a bit of delay. Some of them don't. In the middle section, there's your master fader. So this would be your volume for your main mix. And don't even actually use these, but there's a full mute for the whole main, and you can lock the main to a certain volume. But over here, there are buttons to switch to auxiliary inputs, and what it'll do is it will show you the other inputs on the board that aren't channels. So you've got effects returns. You've got an auxiliary 1 in at the back, an auxiliary 2 in at the back, a tape in at the back, and there's a TalkBack mic. And this is my TalkBack mic. Let's see if I can get it so you can see it. There it is. I've got the Shure TalkBack mic. It's just clamped to my desk, or there's a hole in my desk, and then it goes through and goes back to the TalkBack input. So there's no dedicated TalkBack mic on the board. You have to plug in an external mic to use TalkBack, but it's there as a feature. And obviously you wouldn't play TalkBack mic through the main, so when you get to main, you wouldn't bring up TalkBack into your main room. Ragarek asked, do I ever use the input delay? I haven't had to use input delay. I assume you mean like delay compensation to adjust for delay into the computer. So confirm if that's what you mean. But when I'm tracking, so if I'm doing vocals, if we've got bed tracks, I'll be playing the bed tracks back through Studio One. And usually just to one fader, like just the mix, and then we'll be listening to the vocal mic directly from the board. So we're listening to the bed tracks coming from the computer. We're not echoing through the computer and back to listen to the voice. We're listening to that directly until the track is laid, and then we'll listen to that as part of the mix coming back. So what else do I want to cover? Besides the auxiliary inputs, which are shown across there are DCA groups. So DCA groups, for those who've never used a full mixer before, is digital control automation. I think that's what it's called. It used to be voltage control automation. Basically, in old analog mixers, it was so you could take a bunch of faders and send them to a single fader to control the volume for all those faders. So, for example, a drum mix, and I could show you that sort of quickly. If you had a mix here, if these were the drums and those are your levels, but you want to be able to bring the levels of the drums up and down, you could create a DCA fader 1 here, hold select down, sorry, I have to use two hands. So hold select down and choose the tracks I want to be part of that mix and let go. And now you'll see when I'm on DCA 1 here, when I've selected it, those are the channels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It could have been 1, 2, 7, 9. It could be whatever. And as I move this up and down now, you have central control over the mix of that group of faders. So again, in the studio, I don't tend to use that because we're normally just tracking and then mixing from the DAW. So if I don't want those in there, I just press them again. I think I can get them all out. And then the Mix Effects Master button gives you all your auxiliary levels from the main mix here. So 15 and 16 you can see are up, because when I'm in 15 or 16, I need those up to be sending to OBS. Nothing else has been set up here. So that's kind of the layout. The other aspects here are, there's some effects mutes and a tap control for a delay tap, getting a delay rhythm. There's monitor volume and your headphone volumes, and the headphone output is at the front of the mixer down here. So for me, I don't use it because I just use a headphone amp that is going through my auxiliary mixes anyway. So I've just got it butted up there. I can't really get at it. There's some monitor settings. There's some Bluetooth settings, which we'll look at. And that's sort of the general overview. So really first thing I want to do was, let's get out of Mixmaster here and go back to inputs. And if you choose a channel and you want to start working with the fat channel, your options are right here. The first four are really your fat channel options: input, gate, compressor, and EQ. But you can also do everything from the touch screen. So input is going to get you your gain. On the 32S, you have these little displays that change depending on the scene you're on. So when I change this to compressor, it becomes the release and the attack and the ratio. When I change it to input, this becomes pan and preamp and the gate, etc. And when I change to EQ, this becomes the lows, the low frequency, the low mids, low mid frequency, etc., high mids. So these buttons move as you go along. So let's just go through. You got 48 volt phantom power, of course, phase inversion, whether or not that channel is assigned to your main mix, so main right there, or if you want to create a subgroup. So you can use auxes as subgroups, which I do not, so I won't even get into that. And then copy and load fat channel settings. So if you've set up a nice compressor and something for one of your vocals, and the background vocalist is going to have the same one, you can copy and then load that onto another channel using these buttons. The gate here, there's a power on, and then a gate threshold, so you can crank the threshold. You see how many dB the threshold is going to be set at. You've got an attack and release and range for the gate, so we don't need that on. Let's turn that Compressor, you've got a variety of compressors. Again, there's a power on. The standard compressor is a nice sounding compressor, nothing wrong with it. Attack, ratio, threshold, etc. But then when you buy any of the Studiolives, you get access to a pack of extra compressors for Studio One and for the Studiolive Mixer. So the standard, the tube, the FET, and the Brit compressor are the built-in ones that anybody would get in Studio One as well. So this is an LA2A style compressor. The thing I would say about this compressor is the controls are dialed way up from a normal LA2A. So in order to start getting peak reduction, you're normally cranking this thing about to there on any source. It's sort of this last little bit of the peak reduction that really kicks in. So it does sound nice, but it doesn't behave like a typical LA2A. The other ones you got here are... Now, here's another thing I'll point out. The touch screen on this is not great. It works, but it's not like an iPad, a modern iPad, where you can just touch and things work. Like I can hit things 2 or 3 times sometimes and they might not kick in. Yeah, and it is a shame they haven't done more emulations. I mean, really, they should fix up the effects and provide a lot more effects, as well as... well, there's about 10, I think, compressors, so that's not bad, and I think there's a similar number of EQs. Ian also asked how many DCA channels are there. I believe there's 24. So when you go in here, you got 1 to 8, and then you can tab over 16, 24. So plenty of groups. Maximum inputs on a 32S is 32 channels. So even if you buy an analog stage box or another rack mount mixer, they're basically sharing channels. So for a while I had a 16R rack, and my thought was I'd have all the tracking room in the 16R, the control room going in through the 32S, and then for any of the inputs like the 1 to 12 that I use, or 16 even in the tracking room, I would just choose those inputs and switch to network when I wanted to use that input. But it worked and it was fine, but you know, really it was overkill, so I sold that and it was generating more heat in the room. I don't know. I just thought I don't really need that. I could just patch things in as I need to. So let me show you the Universal Control software here. So Universal Control is the software that comes with the mixer for your desktop for controlling all these same functions. And the reason I want to show this is because everything I'm doing on the mixer can be done through software as well. So you know, if I bring up this fader, let's see, I'm on aux3 here. If I'm on the main mix and when I go to the main mix, there's those faders I set that I emulated were drum faders. So adjusting them here, adjust them on my mixer. And I've got another scene here that shows both. So when this is in the background here, if I choose one of these channels, so let's say I go to channel 11 here, so that we're seeing channel 11 on the Studiolive Mixer. If I choose channel 11 on the software Universal Control and say I go to compressor, when I change the compressor type on here to tube, it will also change. I mean, it's in sync with it. It's just a control surface, in a sense, control software for the Studiolive. But to some extent, it might be easier to do a lot of the grunt work through the software than through the touch screen, just because the touch screen isn't that great. Hello from India, or Indiana, sorry. Hello from Indiana. It's Chedabe. Welcome, Chedabe. So yeah, there's a variety of compressors here, and if you look on this, well, let's see how small is that even showing up on your screen. It is not. When I do the drop down, it doesn't show for you. So let me show it here. Standard tube, the FET compressor, Brit compressor, classic compressor, Comp 160, Everest 100A, the Fairchild 670, or FC, because it's not actually a Fairchild, RC 500, the Tube CB, and the VT1. So I don't always know which vintage compressor these are emulating, because I don't know every vintage compressor, but there's the VT1. Let's go classic compressor is the Personus compressor. The Brit compressor is emulating SSL. The Alpine, let's see, Comp 160. See what I mean about the touch sensitivity is not great. Again, don't know which it's emulating. You can find out online. Whoops. And now I've gone to the wrong page here. See, it's not picking up my finger hit right. It thinks I'm hitting channel 11, but I'm trying to hit the compressor. And as you scroll down, this is the one I've used a lot on vocals, is the Everest. So I think this is based on an Alpine compressor, if I remember. And it's a tube compressor, and it's basically just got fast, medium, slow attack and fast, medium, slow release, and then your gain reduction and your gain. And the way I've used it primarily in mixing is setting it on fast and fast on vocals and doing a mild compression to tame transients at the beginning of a vocal, and then slow and slow. And I found that, especially for my daughter, it sounded great. So we got the Comp 160 Everest Fairchild, which looks like a Fairchild. We got the, oops, I said Comp 160 Tube CB. It's a tube compressor. And there we are stuck again. Oh, see why it drives me nuts. I'm gonna do them from the software. It's easier. VT1, we did. RC500. I think I've done them all. Comp 160. Okay, similar thing with EQs. You've got a standard sort of in Studio One. It's called the Pro EQ, but I don't know if this is actually the Pro EQ in the mixer, if they label it the same. But you have a variety of, and again, I'm going to drop them from the software because it's a bit easier for me. You got a passive EQ that's basically your Pultec style. Vintage EQ. You've got Alpine EQ. Well, that was the Alpine, so I'm not sure what I'm saying about Alpine. Baxandall EQ, RC500, Solar 69, Tube EQ, Vintage 3 band, and VT1 EQ. So again, the first four come by default. The other ones are add-ons that I got them with the 32S, I'm pretty sure, or I might have got them with the Studiolive Studio One online subscription. They might have come from that. So I have the whole thing. Okay, so variety of things you can apply to any channel. Next thing I wanted to talk about was user mode, because by default you have these inputs, but you may not want. Actually, I'm going to skip user mode. I'm going to go right to scenes, because I want to get my setup back to the way it used to be. Scenes and projects allow you to save setup of fat channel settings, gains, naming conventions for the tracks, and whether they're linked, whether phantom power is on, etc. All those things can be saved into scenes, and multiple scenes could be saved into projects. And I typically, I've got 4 here now. I made a blank scene just so these would all show channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 by default. But my default is the composition scene that I have set up, and if I hit recall, you'll see that everything will take a second, load up. All my faders come up, because normally I have all my synthesizers turned up and just muted and unmute them as I need them. And now when I go into user mode, what you can see is user mode, you basically can rearrange the tracks how you want. And with user mode, anything that was a stereo channel, so let's say here's the D50 on 11 and 12, it's a stereo channel because I've linked them together. If I unlink, they become individual channels. Link them together, it's a stereo channel, automatically pans them to the sides. Go into user mode, you see I've put my D50 over here as number 11. It only shows the left channel because this one fader now is controlling the stereo channel, so it's controlling both left and right. So for user mode, And I found out the hard way after setting up that blank one. I went through the blank one. I deleted all my user settings. It doesn't appear that user settings save with the scene. So if I switch to my drum scene, for example, so if I want to track drums, I've already know where I'm going to plug in kick, snare, mics, etc. Hit recall. These tracks will all rename here. Oh, we got a synthesizer going here. At least I did in the room. It might not have been going for you guys. Overheads, kick, snare, hat, floor tom, etc. But the user layout is exactly the same. So just to show how do you do user mode, if you want to assign something to a channel, you just hold the select, and then the channel list will pop up here, and you can choose what you want to put there. So I put the DW8000 there. Now I've got it in two places. I actually put the right channel of the DW8000 there, and the left channel is over here. If you want to take that away, you just hit it again and it goes blank. And if they've never been assigned, you can just switch between them. If they've been assigned before and you select them, you'll see the screen goes away. You have to re-hold it down to get the screen back up. So you can rearrange your tracks however you want. And the way I've done it is I've got a wall of synths on the back wall with 3 synths here. I have another wall with 3 and 2 drum machines. So that's those 5. Then I've got my 12 mics for tracking, but they are also doubling up for my composition station here. I've got my desk mic. I've got an 11 rack guitar interface, and I've got a line input off of that so I can do line track. I got the TalkBack, and then I've got a channel for the click, a channel for Studio One playback, and a channel for playing back from my PC. So when I started the stream, I was playing from Studio One, and if I go back to mix 1516 here, if I turn this down and start this and turn this up, it should start being heard by you guys as well. So you can assign the auxiliary 1 in, auxiliary 2 in, and tape machine to come from USB instead of coming from the back panel, or you can just plug aux into there. If you want to put your cell phone in there all the time, or you had a tape deck you wanted to play through for old tapes, you could do that right there. So user mode, pretty straightforward. Just choose user, switch back to inputs. User mode will stay engaged as you go through mixes. So if I'm on the main mix, you can see I've got my users layout here, and if I switch down to mix 1516 that I'm using for the desk here, you get that. And if I want to see all the inputs, I go back to inputs here and use the next and previous to move along. Because if, for example, I'm showing the auxes here, I'm stopping at input 24 here because I'm using those for auxes. I can hit next here and now see 25 to 32, plus the effects and TalkBack, PC, tape, auxiliary, etc. Okay. Obviously, your mixes go out through mix outputs on the back. Most of those are XLR, but the last 4 are 1/4 inch for some reason. I think it was a space thing on the back. They went XLR all the way along, and then the last 4 went to 1/4 inch. So keep that in mind if you're planning multiple mixes. But if you want to set up a headphone mix, for example, I have mix 1 and 2 coming out the back, goes into my headphone amp. That goes to up to 8 headphones, which I almost never use. But I could go to 8 headphones. I can pull up a mix for the headphones. And then if I want to use my second set of headphones, because my headphone amp has 2, I could do a completely separate mix. If you want to copy the mix, there's no way to do it directly on the board that I have yet found. What you have to do is, let me go back to the UC software. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but you have to select the auxiliary you want to copy and literally hit Control C for copy or Command C on a Mac, and then go to the other one. So if let's see, if I do both of them here, I still won't be able to see it. I'll do it just with the switcher. So I'm clicking on aux 1 in the software, hitting Control C, clicking on aux 3, hitting Control V. Now I'll go to aux 3 here, hit Control V, and there's the copied mix from 1 and 2. So they should be the same. And the only reason the other side is changing is because it's on aux inputs. So you can copy mixes between, so that's really fast for setting up. If you set up a mix in the room and that's kind of what you want for your headphone mix, you could copy the main mix again through the software, the UC software. You could just choose main mix up here. Okay, you can't see my mouse. Choose main, could do Control C, choose aux and do Control V, and you can paste it in there. So, of course, because it's a digital mixer, one of the complicated things of a digital mixer is there is digital routing. Whoops, I went to scenes. I didn't mean scenes. There is digital routing, so digital patching. So basically every input, all 32 of your channels, as I showed you on the board, could be analog or network or USB or SD card, and you can change them in the software here too. And I haven't used the ear mixed Reg because I had already purchased a headphone amp and I wired my studio not knowing I was putting in a Studiolive at the time. So I just pulled headphone cables into the tracking room. If I was building a new space, I think I'd do everything Cat5 and AVB or Dante or whichever network protocol. They're all pretty solid right now. What's Patrick saying about his 32SX? Oh, you had the 32SX, then a 16 rack mount, which is the first one I had too. Then Allen Heath. I've heard Allen Heaths are quite good. So are you saying the Allen Heath is much better? And just confirm that. And it may be the main reason I chose Studiolive was because I used Studio One, and it was like, well, if I'm going to get a digital mixer, I might as well get the one that integrates the best with the product I'm using. It wasn't about the quality. So, and Ragged Rec is fully AVB, yeah, and NDI. So, okay, so you can patch things to other things. So by default, channel 1 is mic line 1, and channel 2 is mic line 2, and channel 3 is mic line 3, etc. And eventually you get over to channel 32. So they're by default, they're mapped to the same thing. But because you can remap them, if one day you went, gee, I wish channel 1 was actually on channel 8, well, you can do that through your input patching. The main thing I use for patching is not the sends or the AVB, but it's the USB sends. And in the description for this live stream, so if you see the replay later, or you go, I don't know if you, I guess you guys can scroll down. I'm not actually on YouTube. If you scroll down, you'll see I've given a link to a Google Doc and to Personus's technical document. But basically, I made a map, a spreadsheet with all the USB connections, because I just found that it was annoying the way they had them listed on their webpage. And on Mac, I'm not sure, because I was on Mac originally, and there was a list of which of the connections were mapped to auxiliary 1, auxiliary 2, and tape. But on Windows, 39 and 40 are 39 and 40 as a send are the mains out, and then on the other side, coming into the mixer, 33, 34 is aux 1, 35, 36 is aux 2, and 37, 38 is the tape input. So in the software, I don't actually set it up in the software. I set it up using the control panel. But you'll see that when I get to mix 15 and 16 here, 15 and 16 are going to 39 and 40. So that's my 15 and 16 here that's going to OBS, and that shows up in Windows as the WDM7 and 8. So you actually end up with 4 different inputs in Windows. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that with the mixer is for live streaming, for example, I could go to mix 15, 16 here, and I could find my, go to my user so I can see what I'm doing here. And I'm on my wrong screen here. Scene, go back to my composition so I can find my channel. So this is my Gemini synth over here. So if I play this, I can bring it up and I can be talking or playing, and hopefully hopefully that's not on hold. No, it's not. So you could build a mix for live streaming or for chatting. So I use that, say, on Discord. I use it this is my default setup for any video chatting I do, is going through a desktop mic through my mixer, not through my webcam mic, although I could go through my webcam mic. I guess I wasn't on the switcher there. Okay, so yeah, I just want to kind of show that. So let's go to the actual switcher, and this is the way I normally do it: is audio routing, digital patching, and you see I'm already selected on USB send because I use this so often when I'm rearranging things. You scroll down, you have to choose the side you want to be on first, which is a little bit annoying because you're always selecting a USB before you have chosen the one you want. So select it, slide down. So I would go down to 37 and 38. And right now that's tape in left and right, which is what I actually want it to be. So I use WDM 7 and 8 as my default output in Windows, and that goes to my tape input. I labeled it PC. And then auxiliary 2, you'll see here, auxiliary 1 is 33 and 34. That's what I assign my click to in Studio One. And then 35, 36 is my mix in Studio One. And that way I have a separate click track when I want to assign click to, say, a drummer, but I don't want that same click to go to the rest of the band. So I could have two headphone mixes. One I bring the click up in, one I don't. So yeah, TalkBack does not have a USB in. I look for that, and I don't believe it does. So I think you imagined it. That's the one thing with the TalkBack mic. It can't go to the mains as far as I know, and it can assign to any of the mixes. You can have the TalkBack go into the mixes. Okay, another interesting thing we were talking about. The tape and auxiliary inputs. So my PC is playing back through here. So I don't know if I bring up something on my I get a copyright strike here. I'll just bring up something on my PC, and if I bring that up, you should be hearing that come through the OBS stream. And I'll just stop it so I don't go long enough. So for MIDI, I've got a completely different setup for MIDI. I will explain, but I'm not going there today. So for my MIDI, my primary keyboard and my drum machines that are beside my desk are just USB connected for MIDI. And then for my synthesizers at the back of the room, I bought iConnectivity makes a product called Mio XL and Mio XM, and I have the XM version. XL is I think a 16-port MIDI network connector, and the XMs are 8 MIDI ports and 4 USB ports, but technically I think up to 8 USB synthesizers can be plugged in through there. So that's all going through my computer. So my MIDI, I have to have my computer on for synths in the front of the room to talk to synths in the back of the room, but everything is managed through network MIDI. And if you check on my channel for the iConnectivity Mio XM video, I explain how it works and I show the software and how that works. But oh, you have the Mio XL as well. Yeah, it's great. It's actually, I found when testing over MIDI DIN, it actually, to the USB things at the back of the room, it responds faster than MIDI DIN does directly. So if you think network latency for MIDI is going to be a problem, it is not. Of course, I've got a dedicated switch just for the studio. I'm not going through the house switch. I've got that separate. So, okay. So the other thing I was going to say about the tape input is, by default, the tape input is into the board is coming from the connections at the back. But if you reroute it using your digital patching, you can get it coming from your computer. There's also the ability to edit the tape input here and choose either network. So if you had the AVB switch and you're wanting the source for your tape to come from the AVB switch, you can do that. You can also have it come from the SD card. So as I was saying, you could have playback music coming from an SD card or something like that to your tape. But you also have a Bluetooth setting here. So if I switch this on to Bluetooth now, once it's on Bluetooth, I've unpaired my device here. So if I hold down the Bluetooth button, it should flash for it in a second here. I had some trouble with this earlier. Okay, so it's flashing. So now if I go into my Bluetooth settings on my phone, I'll see Studiolive 32 and choose it. It'll do the pairing. Assume you, oops, I'm not far enough up, but it's doing connecting. And then it asks me, do I want to pair? It's pairing to my phone. So now I can turn the volume up, and again, so I'm not really playing the music. I'll just, this was a show I was at the other night in town. And you can play from your phone through your mixer, which is so cool. Okay, so let's stop that. And switch that back to USB so I don't forget. Okay, that was the other thing I want to mention. Digital patching, Bluetooth, USB send and return. So again, that maps on the, there's a link to it underneath the description of this live stream. I don't know if there's really much else to say about auxiliary mixes other than they're normal aux mixes, so you can use them for external effects. So if you plug in external effects into 5 or 5.6 if it's stereo, and you bring it back into a channel, that's the only problem. You either have to use one of your aux returns or the tape return or one of your channels for your external effects. You can integrate external effects through the aux mixes directly. I'm just checking out what's going on. Dual MIDI signals. Okay, yeah. Okay, you're talking about MIDI. The other thing I often do, or a little trick I use when I'm setting up headphone mixes is, so I've got I've got the band in the tracking room or maybe in both rooms, and I've got my levels set and I want to set them up a headphone mix. Rather than grab a set of headphones, plug it into my headphone amp, and then use one of those headphone feeds to drive headphones to check their mix, you can check all that through the monitors. So when you hit edit over the monitors, you monitor volumes there. The default is it usually comes up on the phones and it says your phones are being fed from the mains out, but it could be fed from any of your mixes, either mono or stereo. So for example, hopefully this won't cause feedback, but if I switch to 1516 now I'm listening to the OBS feed that you guys are listening to. And I usually don't, because I don't want my mic coming back through the speakers and causing feedback, but it seems to be low enough. It's not an issue. So you could set up your, pick your mix, set your headphone mix there, and then switch back to mains. And it's one way you can reference headphone mixes without having to adjust a headphone amp that might be separate. It'd probably be different if you have the, what's it called, the, not Q-Mix, the separate headphone product that Personus makes. Someone mentioned it already that they have it. I think it scrolled off my screen. Okay, what else was I going to talk about here? So changing monitor sources to me is key for in the studio for checking headphone mixes. As long as you remember to switch back before you hit your TalkBack mic, because of course your TalkBack mic is sensitive to the room. TalkBack mic, not that you wouldn't know this, but TalkBack mic has its own gain setting, of course, and also can be panned left or right in the stereo field for the mix. So if you just want to tap ear mix, thank you, Cheddar Bay. Yeah, the ear mix system. Since I don't have that, I use a rack mount headphone amp. I can just reach down to change people's volumes right there. But and there's a high pass filter as well on the headphone amp, which I forgot to mention, and actually probably should have it turned on mine because I've changed settings so many times setting up for things. I probably lost some of my settings. So So TalkBack mic, and it's saying where the TalkBack's being sent to. So it's being sent to all the aux mixes, of course. I don't think I can send it to the mains. Oh, yes, you can. I was incorrect. So it's also possible to send TalkBack to the mains. So, or to subgroups. And subgroups work just like auxes, except you go in and set them up as subgroups in the settings, and then you can use the subgroup outs on the back for mixes to a subgroup if you need to. I just use the aux mixes. I've never gotten into the subgroups. Let's go back to user, oops, mix 1516. Okay, what else did I have I wanted to cover? QMix and UC Surface. So let's get into that. So I've got a tablet here, or it's my laptop, but it also acts as a tablet. So one of the best things about this mixer, especially Ian, you were talking about looking at it for live sound, and this is a great feature, is the remote control. Now, pretty well every digital mixer, Behringer, whoever, Allen and Heath, Mackie, whatever, they're going to have this ability. But what you'll see is, and let me go back to, do I have a camera? Let's see. I'm going to try and set this up so you can see. If I go back to the universal control here. Okay, in universal control, when you go into settings here, let me just talk about universal control. This is a great piece of software in terms of what it does. It's horribly laid out. It doesn't follow any of the conventions of any normal windowed-based software. There's no menu at the top for file, save, whatever. They created their own little navigation system, which drives me insane, but I've finally gotten familiar with it. So your menus are over at the right-hand side here. The first one being kind of your overall settings, and then once you get into your overall settings, you have tabs across the top for each of those settings. And then, as you saw on some of them, you have tabs underneath for each of those settings. And then when you get to input patch, you have tabs for each of those. So it's just kind of weirdly laid out. And to get out of that, you have to hit the gear again. To do your scenes and projects, there's a scenes and projects folder here that has, these are also on the touch screen, but I didn't really show them. You can filter out what you're saving, but if you want to, if we want to save the scene I've got now, I just hit store here and it would save it into blank scene, or I could pick a new scene, hit store, call that scene a name, and put it there. So, but to get out, you use X to get out. I don't believe you can use, let me just double check this. You can't even just hit escape. So I found that just awkward and awful. There's a graphic EQ for the overall mix you're on. So this is auxiliary 1. So if for some reason you needed to EQ your mix, you can do that. And then these are the effects. I didn't show you through the effects, but there's a digital reverb. The ones I've set up, I've got A set to the digital PA 16 digital reverb. It sounds reasonably good. This digital XL reverb, again, reasonably good. They're not great. The stereo delay is okay. And the last one I have currently set a stereo delay, but there is a chorus. I couldn't remember. There's a chorus and there's a flanger. Actually, these might be new. I don't think these were here the last time I went to look. So obviously I keep my software up to date, but I didn't look for those probably got added a long time ago. There's a mono delay, etc. So there's a bunch of effects, and you can get out those effects from the mixer itself. And then you have your mixes and your main settings. So if you want to assign, we just saw that effect A over here is the digital reverb. And if I want to assign to effect A, I can click effect A and move faders here. And if I want to now add that into auxiliary 1, I would go the effects return for A, I'd bring up in auxiliary 1 so they get the reverb back, etc. So to me, it's a little bit of an awkward layout. I've lost track of where I was sitting. Oh, UC Surface. So if you go in here, what you'll see is when you go to use UC Surface and QMix, so UC Surface is full control of your mixer, or up to full control of your mixer from a tablet or phone, but ideally a tablet. That's not the one I want. I want this one where you can see both. Okay, so let's get that sort of there. So UC surface, or universal control is here, and you get basically the UC surface. What you're going to see if you try and use this, so you basically have to be on the same Wi-Fi network that your switchers, your mixer's plugged into. You'll see it show up if it's all been set up properly. But what's going to happen is there won't be any access until you assign it in device permissions. So as soon as I go to try and get at this, it now shows up Google Pixelbook, Android, and I can add permissions here, and you can add specific permissions. So I could say I'm only allowed to adjust auxiliary 1 and 2. And what you'll find is that now on this version, which, yeah, you can sort of see it, I can see mixes and I can see aux 1 and 2, and that's all I can see. I can't see mains, and I can start if playing with the mixes. So if you can't see my full mixer with this view, but trust me, if I'm moving these up and down on here, it moves them up and down on the actual mixer. So ideally what you do is you set this mix to front of house, and then you have full control of the mixer over Wi-Fi. So that's one of the really cool features, is just that ability. So I've used this a little bit. I've mentioned on my channel, I've started drumming as a therapy, and I made a little video of myself drumming and was trying to set my own levels. And I thought, great, I can use UC Surface or Universal Control through the Android, have it beside me while I'm setting drum levels. But I forgot all my drum mics go into 500 series pre's, so I still had to keep walking in here to adjust the gain, because I'm going through those and going into line inputs instead. So anyways, that's, basically it's all the same settings. It looks exactly the same, all the same annoying menu items, and touch response is not incredible either. So now if I go here, there's another piece of software. This is more for the phone, but I'll load it up on here, which is QMix. And let's change my my access to none again. Let's just say aux 1 and 2. This would be typically for the musicians. Can you see that? Yes, you can. For the musicians in the studio, they can do their own headphone mixes. So they can bring their faders up and they'll be labeled whatever they're labeled. But the default on a phone is it goes this way. And let's see if it's going to switch. The default on the phone is you set up a mix for them, and it shows them on their phone this giant wheel with one side that says band and one side that says me. And if they scroll this wheel up, their volume goes up and the band stays the same. And if it gets to the point where they're even, and we haven't assigned which one's me, but eventually if you get up there, when it gets higher than the band will start coming down. So if it's like a vocalist and they're just basically trying to adjust their headphone mix for themselves, they can do it there. But first thing they have to do is go into this mode and choose which of the channels is the actual me channel. And I don't even know if I can do that on here. Hang on. I mean, I've so rarely used this because most people just are happy with the headphone mix. So I've only used it for testing. So okay, somewhere in here there's a setting where you choose which channel you want, and you say that's going to be the me button for when you turn it the other way. So that was another feature there. What do you got for other questions? Asked if they plan to upgrade the GUI like they did for the Quantums. It looks so dated. Yeah, somebody else recently asked me about that too in comments, and it may have been you, but somebody in my YouTube comments was asking about whether there were any plans from Personus to upgrade the software for the Studiolive so that the interface was better. And I've seen nothing. My recommendation would be that they update the effects, just make them a bit better. I'd actually appreciate it if they updated the fat channel, just more of the settings. Like I was saying, like the LA2A, you have to crank the input or the gain reduction so much to get it to even start affecting the signal, that I wish they'd just adjust that by a threshold, change it 30%, 30% more likely to catch the transients and just bring that up. So, okay, let's go back to switcher. Okay, I think I've covered most of what. Oh, the other thing I was just going to talk about. I don't have a screenshot for this, but what I've done is I've integrated 500 series preamps into my setup, mainly because I really wish I had an analog mixer, and I like analog controls. I like having physical knobs for the individual 500 series pre's or individual preamps. And so right beside me, to my left, is my 500 series rack. There's 10 slots in it. I've got two of the Cranbourne Camden 500s, and then the rest are the SSL 6CH. And I got those partly because I like SSL and partly because I wanted to see if their little built-in compressors were any good. And they're fine. So I can use mild compression while tracking without having to go in a fat channel. And I've plugged those into 17 through, I guess, 26. No, 18 through, no, 19 through 28. So those 10 500 series actually go into those XLR inputs at the back. And now I've got two Rupert Neve Newtons. I couldn't afford their Shelford channel. They're just way too expensive, but I was able to get two of the Newtons and have those as channel strips, and those are on 17 and 18. So in a sense, I'm using 17 to 28 just for digital analog conversion. I'm using external hardware to do the mic pre's, and I tend to, like I say, I've got some compression there. I do have an external compressor, so I can assign that to any of the channels if I want, or I could use the fat channel, but I tend to not use the fat channel when tracking, and I use the fat channel when mixing in Studio One itself. So external preamps are possible. One of the things I'm going to point out is that the max inputs on a 32S, or sorry, on a Studiolive, the maximum number of inputs is 64, and that is only on the Studiolive 64S. 64S has 32 built in, and you could add 32 more through AVB. That's the 64S, or 64, yeah, 64S. 32S has 32 inputs, and you can't add more. And that was a mistake I made when I purchased, because when I purchased, I thought, well, someday I'll just buy another 16 inputs and add a bunch more stuff. But it turns out, no, they share. If you add 16, you have to decide which channels they share with, and then you're switching between analog or network to go between them. The 32SX, I believe, is that, I can't remember now if that's the 24 fader one, I believe it is, but one of them has 24 faders. There used to be a 16, which I think they don't make anymore. But the one thing is the 16 is all combo jacks. So if you're working with a smaller studio and you only want 16, if you can find a Studiolive 16 Series 3 mixer, and like I say, I think they only make 32 SX or something else now, not the 16. But if you can grab a 16, you get 16 XLR and 16 quarter inch, so you can choose which ones you want to use as line inputs and which ones you want to use as the AES through Burl setup. So for Ragged Rec there, so just so you know, I've gotten rid of the Burl setup, and I'll tell you my embarrassing story. I fixed up this big old Sony analog console. I put it in the room. I hadn't yet wired everything up to it because that was going to cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and I wasn't sold yet that it wasn't too big for the room. But I was listening through just stereo through it, and it sounded fantastic. And I finally made the decision, no, I wasn't going to keep it. I put everything back, and I went, wow, the Studiolive doesn't sound as good. And long story short, I started comparing converters, and I thought it might have been a converter issue, and I thought maybe I can somehow get a converter. So I bought the Burl, and then I found out that I actually had my speakers wired backwards, so they were out of phase. And I think, see you, Ian. Thanks for dropping in. I had them out of phase, which, normally your speakers out of phase, you're going to immediately go, what the heck is wrong? Things sound wrong. It sounded not good, but it still sounded good. It didn't sound as good. And I attribute that to, one, the room sounds great. So even with phase issues, things sounded good. But I attributed that to these Amphion 218s. They are so pristine sounding that it was difficult for me to notice how much bass had been lost because it still sounded good. I was listening to other things going, well, it sounds good. It just doesn't sound as good as when I was plugged into the mixer. Anyway, so I bought the Burl. I used it for a while. I didn't use it that. I use it all the time for uh, listening and mixing, but I didn't use it for tracking because I had to switch over. And one day I just realized, it doesn't sound that much better through the Burl. It sounds better, but it was a marginal increase. Anyways, the way the Burl worked is I took the AES out of the back of the unit and plugged it into the Burl's AES in 1 and set it on AES 1, and took the output from the Burl and plugged that into my monitor controller. And then I took the monitor outs of the Studiolive and plugged that into my monitor controller on a different channel. So A was the Burl and B was the Studiolive. And basically, everything that's playing out the mains, so your main level when you're on main mix here, is going digitally into the Burl and being converted, and that's your converter, rather than using Studiolive's internal digital analog converters that are built in. So you have a digital signal being processed by the board and it hasn't yet hit the converter and gone to your speakers. It goes out the AES out. That's the exact same digital signal that's about to hit the converters inside the Studiolive. So it's the same signal. So if you take that stereo out, you can listen through a Burl converter or any other converter that takes AES inputs. The only issue, and the issue that was enough of an issue for me that it was annoying, is that because you're listening to the mains, you don't get the solo ability because it's not a monitor mix. When you hit solo, it doesn't solo through the Burl because it doesn't solo your mains. That's your front of house, so it won't solo that. So that was bothering me a bit, and I just thought, I could use the money and I'd use the money to buy another Newton channel was what it was. So that's how the AES with Burl works. You basically, or AES into any digital converter, you can have your monitors playing from that other digital analog converter instead. The last thing I was going to just talk about was Studio One and DAW mode. So let's see, do I have? So this is obviously Studio One, and this was the song I was playing at the beginning, which is our song Exhale. And this is, like I said, it's a 10-minute song over 3 parts, and it's each part has its own section. So there's a part 1, a part 2, there's part vocals. Anyways, as long as you've got your Studiolive on your network, same network as your PC, and they both have an IP address working, you can go into the system here and see if I can remember where to find this. Somewhere in here you set the, I thought it was in system. You have to tell it, maybe it's in the DAW mode here itself. No, it's not there. Before DAW mode will work, you have to go into your settings here, and I've completely forgotten where it is. Well, let's look through the menus here. No, it's not capture. It's not user profiles. Utilities, maybe. Scribble setup. I can't remember where it is. There's a place you go in and you have to set that you want your DAW to be controlled by Studio One. Basically, if you haven't set that, you hit this DAW button, nothing happens. But DAW mode basically changes your digital mixer into a control surface for Studio One. So as you can see, let's say, and a lot of these are going off the screen here, but we got part 1 here. Second, yeah, okay. First one's off the screen because that's chord preview, which is a hidden channel. So as you can see, I can control the fader in Studio One from here. I could solo that track, and potentially bring up the fat channel in Studio One. So if I hit fat channel here, it opens it in Studio One. Or I'm hitting my inserts, right? So we've got a Pro EQ on that channel. So you can do some DAW control directly from the touchscreen, bring things up, but that's not actually editing that EQ. However, over here there are some knobs that allow you to do that. So if you have the 32S, you can see what they are. You can see this is mid-frequency, gain, etc. And depending on what your thing you're on is, it's going to change. This is high pass, threshold, low gain, right? They change. If you're on the 32SX, you don't have these little displays here, so you have to know in advance what these knobs are going to change. I find it's just easier to do that type of editing directly in Studio One. But oh, and you can't see this because I'm not sharing the whole screen. Let me try this again. Full monitor. I'll change to the full monitor. Problem with sharing just an application is that you don't see the sub windows pop up. So let me show that again. When I hit this fat channel here, it's opening in Studio One, which it was not showing on the screen. So that you've got DAW control. For myself, I tend to not use it. I have a fader port. It's a single fader. It's got the, it's right beside me, like right beside my keyboard, write and reach. I can mute arm tracks. I can put write, enable, automation write, automation read. I can do all that from the fader port on the Studiolive. The transports are way up here. I don't like them that far away. I mean, it's within arm's reach, but it's a bit of a reach. As soon as I have to lean forward in my chair to do it, I don't want to be doing that for starting and stopping a recording, because I want to be able to do that from right beside me. So I have that. I don't think my camera can see the fader port. So I use both the fader port and the Studiolive, but DAW mode is there as something you can use. And the other thing I'll point out is when we're talking about, so this is DAW control. Obviously, if I'm moving something here, it's moving it in Studio One. Oh, now you can't see that because I got to change the scenes again. So when I'm moving things here. But the other thing you can do is not be in DAW mode, or while you're not in DAW mode, you could mix using the faders directly if you wanted to take parts. So for example, this first, okay, I'm not in DAW mode anymore. This first one here is going to main. I could, instead of sending that to main, I could go into Studio One and set the USB out for channel 1 as an option to assign to, and I could assign that track to USB 1 or USB 2 or USB 3. So you can send audio from individual tracks back to individual tracks on your mixer. I don't do it that way, but it's possible. And one of the reasons you might do that is if you want to use hardware effects, but you don't want to have to go into the mode where you set your mixer to act like an audio interface instead, because your mixes are taking all their information from the faders. So in order to send anything to an external mix on the mixer, and like say I had a reverb on mix 5 here, in order to send something there, I'd have to assign it through the USB from Studio One to come back into there, and then I could assign it to that mix, and then I'd still have to bring it back in another channel. So you can mix and match analog versus network versus USB channels. So it is an optional way to set up your software to send tracks to an external effects unit. Just sort of wanted to point that out as that's something that's possible to do. So the other thing you can do instead of DAW mode is what they call interface mode here. And I can't hit that because if I hit interface mode, it will take my aux send and disable it. What it basically does is it takes these mixes and says they're no longer mixes of what's on the board here. They're just straight outputs from your software. They're mix 1 out, mix 2 out from whatever software you're sending to them. So it gives you 16 outputs on the back of your mixer that are coming straight from your software and bypassing the internal mixing on the actual Studiolive Mixer. So, okay, that was my list. I think I got through it all. And look at that, I didn't go 2.5 hours. So hopefully that was helpful. I think this will sit as a live stream on my channel now, so people will find it. The main reason I wanted to do this as a live stream was I just had, I think it's been over 2 years ago that I did the Studiolive Mixer video on why I chose it. And I still get comments to this day of people coming and find it gets regularly watched. The climbs are still going up, whereas other things are not. So, coming up for my channel, if you've been following, I'm starting a series on musicians of Vancouver Island. I'm so excited. I'm going to be doing multi-camera shots of musicians playing right in the tracking room, recorded live off the floor, and then mixed and edited and presented to you. My first band is Carmine. They're coming in this week. I'll probably queue up a few and then start releasing them. So just before September, I should have the first one out, or maybe just into September, and then have weekly video reveals of bands from the island. We've got folk music, I've got some Celtic punk, I've got some fairly hard rock, Americana, some roots, some singer-songwriter. Chedabe has a question. Okay, overall, what do you like most about using Studiolive, and what do you like least? If you're building a new studio today, would you still choose the Studiolive? I think what I like most about it is the flexibility of the inputs and the control and the integration to Studio One and the workflow for me. Like, that's number one. I wouldn't, like I said, it sounds fine. It sounds, I'm not saying fine as in it's not very good. I'm saying it sounds fine. Like I stick a nice microphone on a source, and I put it through this mixer, and I record it, and I listen back on my nice speakers, and I go, that sounds really nice. And because I can use analog preamps as well, I can impart a little bit of flavor that way. I think if I was going to do it again, I would save up more money and go with an analog mixer. Now that I've dabbled into the old analog mixer technology, I said recently on my last studio update that I'm fixated on getting a Harrison 32 Classic because it's an analog mixer, but it's got digital interfaces built in, Dante interfaces. It would fit. It literally fits exactly where my desk is. I measured it. It's the same width as my desk, and I just have a rack of some hardware. I'd probably actually do mostly software for most of my effects through that mixer. I would just love to have the tactile control, being able to reach on any EQ and directly, even though you have to reset everything at the end of every session. I'd have enough inputs that most of the things would never be reset. They'd be like my D50 would go through a channel, and it would all be set up with an EQ I like, and I'd leave it at that. But I might choose a Studiolive again. I think I might design something. I've thought of this a few times because I've thought about what's going to happen in the future as I get older and eventually move out of the split level house, because we have a lot of stairs. And I've thought, if I built another smaller studio or similar size studio, I'd probably do something like a full analog mixer, or the Cranbourne Audio's what's their one called, the 500. I can't remember their model, but they have one model that's basically a 500 series interface with headphones and everything built in. I might do something like that. As long as I had some physical hands-on control, I think I'd be happier. That would be my main thing. The hands-on control was the whole reason I went with Studiolive or a digital mixer. I wanted to be able to set mixes without having to reach for a mouse, and I can do that. And I reach for a mouse for mixing, which is a completely different thing, because I don't have musicians sitting there waiting to get their levels up or whatever else. I can take my time using a mouse, etc. So thanks everyone for joining my live stream. This is the first one I've done. I wasn't sure if anyone would show or how many people would show. It seems to have gone okay, and hopefully was useful. And with that, I will sign off. Cheers to everybody. And now